Christmas!
Have you ever watched someone step on stage, sing with so much emotion that it gave you goosebumps, even brought the judges to tears, but later discovered that behind all the applause, there was a heartbreaking story you never imagined? Can a big stage truly bring happiness, or does it sometimes add to the pain hiding beneath the surface? This is the heartbreaking story of Sydnie Christmas from Britain's Got Talent, the woman who amazed the world yet carried tragedies of her own. Sydnie's journey isn't just about chasing stardom. It's about dreams, courage, the weight of expectations, silent struggles, and the tragedy that reminds us every smile on stage may be hiding untold pain. From thunderous applause, emotional standing ovations, to the hidden battles only she knew, her story is filled with both inspiration and heartbreak. Before we dive deeper into Sydnie Christmas's life story, make sure you hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more emotional stories filled with lessons from the entertainment world. Reporters who later revisited the story of Sydnie Christmas uncovered a childhood shaped by hardship, determination, and an early love of music that would eventually carry her to the grand stage of Britain's Got Talent, though not without leaving scars along the way. Born in a working-class family in Kent, Sydnie grew up in a household where financial stability was always uncertain and opportunities were limited. Yet what her family lacked in material wealth they tried to make up for in support and encouragement. Teachers recalled her as a bright and energetic child who was always eager to perform in school plays or sing in assemblies, but classmates sometimes treated her cruelly, mocking her appearance or dismissing her ambitions as unrealistic. Journalists piecing together her story reported that these experiences of bullying left her deeply insecure at times, but instead of silencing her, they fueled a determination to prove her worth through her voice. Family friends told reporters that Sydnie often sang around the house for hours, treating her bedroom as a stage, her mirror as an audience, and her dreams as fuel to keep going even when circumstances weighed heavily on her. Her parents, while struggling with bills and daily responsibilities, still found ways to encourage her passions, scraping together what little money they could to fund small singing lessons or local performance opportunities. For Sydnie, music quickly became not just a hobby but an identity and a refuge, the one place where she felt free from judgment and fully herself. Reporters concluded that Sydnie's early life, while filled with obstacles, planted the seeds of resilience and artistry that would later define her public image. Every note she sang on the BGT stage, they noted, carried echoes of those formative years of struggle, self-doubt, but also unwavering hope that one day the world would hear her story through her voice. As journalists continued tracing Sydnie Christmas's path, they highlighted how her journey toward music was marked not by privilege or smooth opportunity, but by relentless persistence, countless small steps, and the transformative power of passion. Reporters discovered that as a teenager, Sydnie balanced part-time jobs with her studies, saving every bit of money she could to invest in vocal training, audition fees, and travel to small gigs where she could gain experience. Choir directors and mentors who spoke to the press remembered her as a young woman with immense raw talent, someone who poured her entire heart into every rehearsal even when there were only a handful of people listening. Local newspapers had once profiled her when she performed at community events, describing her as a voice too big for a small town, and even then it was clear to observers that she was destined for something larger. But her journey was anything but easy. Reporters noted how Sydnie faced rejection after rejection when she auditioned for music schools or theatrical productions, with judges often telling her she wasn't the right look or that her style didn't fit the current trend. Each rejection stung, yet according to friends interviewed later, she never let them extinguish her drive. Instead, she treated every setback as a lesson, going back to practice harder, refine her technique, and expand her repertoire. For Sydnie, music wasn't just a dream but a necessity, the only way she knew to process her emotions and fight through the insecurities life had handed her. Journalists wrote that she had a habit of singing even when walking alone, as though melodies were woven into her very being, and those who knew her best said that when Sydnie sang, she radiated a confidence that seemed to vanish when she wasn't on stage. Reporters concluded that this paradox, of vulnerability in private but strength in song, would become a defining element of her career, and it was precisely this duality that made her eventual appearance on Britain's Got Talent so profoundly moving to those who witnessed it. Reporters who covered Sydnie Christmas's rise to national attention noted that her decision to audition for Britain's Got Talent was not one made lightly, but rather the result of years of hesitation, inner battles, and the encouragement of those closest to her who believed she had something extraordinary to share with the world. Friends and family told journalists that Sydney had long dreamed of a stage that could amplify her voice beyond the small venues and community halls she had grown accustomed to, yet fear of rejection and the weight of past disappointments often held her back. She had applied to various auditions before, only to be met with closed doors, discouraging remarks about her appearance, or feedback that she did not fit the mold of what producers were looking for, and these experiences left her wary of subjecting herself to further scrutiny on such a massive platform. But reporters discovered that the turning point came after a string of local performances where her raw vocal talent brought audiences to tears, convincing her that perhaps the world was finally ready to embrace her as she truly was. Encouraged by friends who saw the sparkle in her when she sang, Sydney submitted her application and prepared for the audition with a mixture of excitement and dread, spending long nights rehearsing alone, questioning whether she was making the right choice, yet unable to shake the conviction that this was her chance to change the trajectory of her life. Journalists later described the day she stepped onto the BGT stage as the culmination of years of private struggle and quiet determination, a moment where the weight of her past collided with the possibility of her future. Her decision, they wrote, was not just about chasing fame, but about confronting the doubts that had haunted her for so long and proving to herself that she could stand under the brightest lights and still shine. When Sydnie Christmas finally appeared on the Britain's Got Talent stage, reporters present in the audience described the atmosphere as charged with curiosity and mild skepticism, the kind that often greets contestants who walk in with little-known background but an air of nervous determination. Dressed simply, with no extravagant gimmicks, Sydney stood before the judges and introduced herself, her voice trembling slightly as she explained her song choice. The audience, according to journalists covering the event, was quiet but restless, unsure of what to expect from the young woman standing in the spotlight. But from the moment the first notes escaped her mouth, the room transformed. Reporters detailed how her voice, rich, powerful, and emotionally raw, filled the theater with a resonance that silenced even the most skeptical onlookers. Within seconds, murmurs turned to cheers, and as she built toward the crescendo of her performance, the judges were visibly moved, with Amanda Holden wiping away tears and Simon Cowell nodding with rare approval. By the end of the song, the entire audience was on its feet in a standing ovation, their applause echoing long after the music stopped. Journalists described the moment as electric, one of those rare instances where television captured genuine, collective awe. Clips of the audition spread rapidly online, garnering millions of views within days, and headlines proclaimed Sydney as the new breakout star whose voice had shaken the world. Yet even in the glow of her success, some reporters noticed the look on Sydney's face backstage, a mix of relief, disbelief, and the lingering insecurity that hinted at the battles still raging within. For the public, the audition was a triumphant introduction to a new star, but for journalists following her story, it was also a poignant reminder that such dazzling moments often mask the quiet fragility of the people who create them. Reporters covering Sydnie Christmas after her audition went viral observed that while her newfound fame catapulted her into the spotlight overnight, it also came with crushing pressures that no amount of applause could fully balance. Within hours of her audition being broadcast, social media feeds across Britain and beyond were flooded with clips of her performance, drawing millions of views and countless comments praising her extraordinary voice and emotional delivery, yet along with the praise came the harsh realities of public scrutiny. Journalists noted that Sydney's life, once defined by quiet determination and small community performances, was suddenly overtaken by interview requests, television appearances, and endless speculation about her future. And while these opportunities validated her talent, they also left her with little room to breathe. Friends confided to reporters that she felt overwhelmed by the expectations placed upon her, worrying constantly about whether her next performance could live up to the viral moment that had defined her career. The tabloids, always eager for a dramatic narrative, portrayed her as the underdog heroine destined for stardom, but this framing also trapped her in an image that felt impossibly perfect, leaving little space for her to be human, to make mistakes, or to show weakness. Online, though thousands celebrated her, others criticized her appearance, mocked her nervousness in interviews, or accused her of being too emotional, and Sydney, like many young performers, found herself drawn into reading those comments late at night, unable to ignore the sting of cruelty hidden behind anonymous screens. Reporters described the paradox she faced: adored by millions yet still haunted by self-doubt, thrust into opportunities she had dreamed of but at the cost of a private life that was quickly slipping away. For Sydney, sudden popularity was both a blessing and a burden, and journalists covering her trajectory concluded that while it opened doors she had once thought closed forever, it also placed a weight on her shoulders heavier than any she had carried before. Behind the stage lights and thunderous applause, reporters who investigated Sydnie Christmas's personal life uncovered a portrait of a young woman grappling with vulnerabilities and battles that the public rarely saw, struggles that contrasted sharply with the confident image projected during her performances. Family members and close friends told journalists that Sydnie often retreated into herself when the camera stopped rolling, battling waves of insecurity and exhaustion that came from trying to meet the impossible expectations now placed upon her. Despite the image of strength and triumph her audition had created, she privately confessed that she sometimes felt like an imposter, terrified that one mistake would shatter the illusion and send her crashing back into obscurity. Reporters highlighted how Sydnie, like many in the entertainment industry, found it difficult to separate her self-worth from the public's opinion, measuring her value through likes, views, and headlines rather than through the quiet knowledge of her own talent. Behind the glamour, she dealt with the same challenges as any young adult: financial worries, family responsibilities, and the weight of maintaining relationships. Yet these issues were magnified by the glare of fame. Journalists described accounts from insiders who revealed that Sydnie often struggled with loneliness, feeling isolated even as her name was on everyone's lips, because she could never be sure who genuinely cared for her as a person and who was drawn only to the spotlight around her. In quiet moments, she returned to music not as performance but as therapy, singing alone in her room as she had done in childhood, a reminder of the simplicity she feared she had lost. Reporters concluded that Sydnie's hidden personal life painted a picture of the high cost of success, that even in triumph she carried invisible battles, and that the vibrant performances the world adored were often born out of a need to heal herself as much as they were meant to entertain others. Reporters who documented the darker side of Sydnie Christmas's journey revealed that despite the adoration she received on stage, she eventually reached a breaking point where the weight of expectations, the harsh glare of media scrutiny, and her own long-standing insecurities collided in devastating ways. Sources close to her confided to journalists that Sydnie often masked her pain with laughter and bravado, but behind the scenes she struggled deeply with anxiety and depression that grew worse as her fame increased. Her nights were filled with sleepless hours scrolling through social media, replaying critical comments in her mind, and questioning whether she was truly good enough to deserve the love she was being shown. Reporters noted that she became increasingly withdrawn during this period, canceling appearances, avoiding calls, and limiting her contact with friends, behaviors that in hindsight painted a picture of someone fighting silently against an internal storm. Those who worked with her described how she would give everything during rehearsals and performances, leaving audiences stunned, only to collapse in exhaustion and tears once the spotlight was gone. Journalists piecing together the story of her lowest moments wrote that the contrast between her public triumph and private despair was stark and heartbreaking, emblematic of how fame can amplify wounds rather than heal them. The tragedy that followed, while shocking to fans, was described by some insiders as a culmination of the mounting pressures she had faced for years, pressures that no single person should have to bear alone. Media coverage of her darkest chapter was filled with sorrowful headlines and tributes, but reporters who had followed her journey emphasized that this was not just the story of a singer who faltered, but of a young woman whose humanity had been overlooked in the relentless pursuit of entertainment. Her lowest point, they wrote, was not a failure of character but a consequence of a system that celebrates talent without protecting the person behind it, and the tragedy she endured left a lasting scar not only on her loved ones but on the millions who had once cheered for her. In the aftermath of Sydnie Christmas's tragedy, reporters documented a tidal wave of reaction from the public and media, a collective outpouring of grief, reflection, and at times uncomfortable reckoning with how her story had been handled while she was alive. Social media platforms filled instantly with clips of her Britain's Got Talent audition, shared with captions mourning the loss of a voice that had touched so many, and hashtags bearing her name trended globally for days. Fans wrote thousands of heartfelt messages, recalling how her courage and vulnerability had inspired them, and many admitted that her struggles mirrored their own, making her story even more poignant. The media, which had once feasted on her rise and occasionally mocked her quirks, now shifted tone, publishing retrospectives that painted her as a tragic heroine whose life raised urgent questions about mental health and the pressures of instant fame. Judges and fellow contestants issued public statements, some breaking down in tears during interviews, confessing they had never realized the depth of Sydnie's inner pain. Reporters highlighted the striking contrast between how she was portrayed during her career, celebrated for her talent yet also scrutinized for her flaws, and how she was remembered after, with compassion and regret dominating the narrative. Analysts interviewed in the wake of her passing pointed out the pattern that her story exemplified. Young performers elevated to dizzying heights only to be left unsupported when the lights dimmed, a cycle that repeated itself too often in modern entertainment. For the public, Sydnie's tragedy became both a mourning and a mirror, forcing fans to confront the reality that behind the extraordinary performances they adored stood a woman struggling to keep herself afloat. Reporters concluded that the public and media reaction, while filled with sorrow, also revealed the power of Sydnie's legacy. She had not only given audiences unforgettable performances but had sparked a conversation that extended far beyond the stage, one about empathy, responsibility, and the cost of turning real human lives into fleeting spectacles. Reporters reflecting on the tragic arc of Sydnie Christmas's journey emphasized that her story offers sobering lessons not only for the entertainment industry but also for society at large, lessons about the fragile balance between fame and humanity, applause and silence, joy and despair. In countless articles and television features following her death, journalists pointed out that Sydnie's life revealed how quickly a performer could be elevated to extraordinary heights only to be left exposed to forces they were ill-equipped to endure. Her story underscored the need for stronger mental health support for young artists, who are often thrust into situations that magnify insecurities and exploit their vulnerability rather than nurture their growth. Reporters noted that while fans adored Sydnie for her authenticity and vulnerability, these very qualities became sources of pressure, as she felt forced to constantly live up to the image of the emotional, relatable underdog, leaving little room for her to simply exist as a flawed and evolving human being. Her tragedy reminded audiences that talent shows and the viral moments they create can sometimes obscure the ongoing realities of the contestants' lives, reducing them to headlines and hashtags instead of recognizing the full depth of their struggles. Mental health advocates interviewed by journalists stressed that Sydnie's story should serve as a wake-up call about the consequences of ignoring the warning signs of depression and burnout, especially in industries built on relentless performance and public exposure. For the public, the lesson was equally personal. Countless fans admitted that they had been moved by Sydnie's performances but had not considered the toll such vulnerability might take on her, and in mourning her loss, they vowed to be kinder, more empathetic, and more attentive not just to celebrities but to the people in their own lives. Reporters concluded that Sydnie's story teaches us to look beyond the lights of the stage, to recognize that behind every breathtaking performance lies a person whose struggles are no less real than anyone else's, and that applause should be accompanied by compassion if it is to mean anything at all. In their final assessments of Sydnie Christmas's life and career, reporters consistently emphasized that her legacy cannot be reduced to a single audition or even to the tragedy that followed, but must instead be understood as the enduring inspiration she offered to millions through her voice, her courage, and her humanity. Retrospective coverage highlighted how her Britain's Got Talent audition remained one of the most unforgettable in the show's history, not merely because of her technical skill but because of the raw emotional honesty she poured into every note, a performance that transcended entertainment and became a shared moment of human connection. Fans around the world continued to circulate clips of her performances, writing messages about how Sydnie had given them hope, courage, and the strength to embrace their own vulnerabilities, and in this way her influence lived on far beyond the stage. Reporters documented how tribute concerts, online campaigns, and countless social media posts honored her memory, transforming her into a symbol of resilience and authenticity, proof that even those whose lives end in tragedy can leave behind light that guides others. Industry professionals interviewed in the aftermath of her passing acknowledged that her story had forced them to rethink how contestants and young performers are treated, sparking conversations about accountability and care that might one day change the culture of entertainment for the better. Journalists concluded that Sydnie's legacy is twofold. She will always be remembered as the girl who walked onto a stage and silenced a crowd with her voice, but also as the woman whose hidden struggles challenged the world to be more compassionate and attentive to the humanity of its stars. In the end, her story became larger than the tragedy. It became a reminder that the most enduring art is not measured in fame or fortune but in the way it touches lives and inspires change. And in this, Sydnie Christmas's voice will never be silenced. And so, the heartbreaking tragedy of Sydnie Christmas from Britain's Got Talent, as recorded by reporters and remembered by fans, stands as both an inspiring and devastating tale, the story of a young woman who astonished the world with her golden voice yet carried wounds that applause could never heal. Her journey is a mirror held up to all of us, reminding us that behind every bright light there can be shadows, behind every triumphant song there can be silent battles, and behind every smile there can be heartbreak unseen. Her legacy, however, ensures that she will not be forgotten, for in her music, her courage, and her story, she continues to inspire conversations about empathy, mental health, and the importance of truly seeing the people behind the performances. Thank you for watching. Find other interesting videos in our channel's playlist.